Okay, now before people get mad at me, I have never seen a top 10 list that I agree with. So, needless to say, me ranking 91 NBA players is bound to generate some disagreement, and that's fine. The only thing I'll clarify is my criteria. So, these are my top 91 players ranked in the shape of a pyramid for the upcoming 23-24 season. So, I'm projecting as to how good they'll be next year. This is not a review of the past year. Yes, it's really difficult to judge, let's say, the difference between Clint Capella and Jalen Green, because they're completely different players. But the central question I'm asking myself whenever I'm trying to decide between players is this: if my goal is to win a championship next year, and winning the championship involves both the regular season and the postseason, in a vacuum, if I'm building a team, how much do I want this player? How valuable is this player? The last clarification I want to make is that this is assuming there are no injuries. This is assuming everybody is healthy, which is not a reasonable assumption to make when you're actually ranking the value of these players. But it's also very hard to rank players taking injuries into account, because then how do you even rank a player like Kawhi or like Zion? That, like, are they just unrankable? And I'm going to judge them based off of how they look when they have been completely healthy. Starting at number one, to nobody's surprise, is Nikola Jokic. This is not only a case of Jokic having earned the number one spot in the NBA during the past season, but this is also just looking forward to this next season. There is no reason to believe Jokic will be taking a step back. He is in the middle of his prime. The thing that is most remarkable about Jokic is his consistency. If you look at his games this past playoffs, he played 20-something games? He had one bad game the entire playoff run. It's not so much that Jokic's ceiling is better than other superstars in the NBA. It's that his floor is the highest out of any superstar. Okay, now we get to number two, number three. Giannis, to me, is a pretty easy selection here. The two-way dominance is still unmatched in this league. Oh, the last thing to know is that this is also not a left to right ranking. Like, if players are in the same level on the pyramid, they're just on the same level. I did not pay attention to whether I ordered a player left to right. The other spot in the second level, I'm going to give to Steph Curry, and it is close. There's a few candidates you could put here, I think. The way Steph Curry still warps defenses, I think, is too valuable. Not to mention, he has the championship pedigree. We've seen how he does in the playoffs. Even when he has bad shooting games, just the fact that he is on the floor provides so much utility to the rest of the team that I'm okay with Steph being at this level. The only argument I could see is that he is getting older, but I don't see any indication that he's going to take a step back next year. I think his game translates pretty well as he ages. Moving on to the third level, Luka Doncic is a pretty easy inclusion here as well. Just one of the greatest offensive players in NBA history already. I'll put Tatum here. Like with Luka, he should continue to get better. He's just now entering his prime. And the last spot is going to surprise a lot of people, but I'm going to put Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I haven't had a chance to talk about SGA. I haven't made a video on him or the Thunder yet, so people have not heard me talk about SGA, but as you can see, I'm a huge fan. I'm a full believer in him having superstar all-time potential. I think he's that good. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is 24 years old. I'm expecting another leap from him this season. Now, he made first team All-NBA last year, 30 points per game, tremendous efficiency across the board. He's league average in three-point shooting, but he only takes like 2 a game, so that doesn't even matter that much. The one knock I think people would also have with regards to SGA is that he's too young. He hasn't proven he can do it in the playoffs yet. Okay, moving on to level 4, 7 through 10. So I have Devin Booker and KD here. I don't think people are going to have many arguments with this. If I actually had to decide between ranking Devin Booker and KD, I would actually put Booker ahead of KD at this point. I mean, Booker was just clearly the Suns' best player last year in the playoffs. I don't think that's going to change. KD's not getting any younger. Booker is entering his prime. And then Kawhi and Joel Embiid. So Kawhi, obviously, if injuries were taken into consideration, he would be unrankable in the entire pyramid because he just doesn't play. But what I'm looking at is I'm looking at Kawhi's body of work at the end of last year's regular season and the first 2 games of the playoffs against the Suns when he didn't get injured. And he was awesome. Like, easily all NBA first team level. So I don't have any problem with putting Kawhi at this level, given my criteria. And then Embiid, I almost knocked him down a level below this, but I also couldn't really put anyone below this above him. So he's kind of in here just by default. Obviously, regular season production is amazing. He's the most valuable player. The playoffs do concern me. I'm betting partially on the fact that every single year he's been criticized for having lackluster playoff performances. He's also had injuries. And look, that just may be part of his career. Like, he's a huge guy. He's had injury concerns pretty much his entire career. That might just continue to be the case. I'm hoping that a healthy Joel Embiid will actually justify this ranking come playoff time if your goal is to win a championship. All right, moving on to the fifth level. This is 11 through 15. LeBron, Anthony Davis, I don't think anybody should have any argument with that. They're both still really good. LeBron is a bit hard to project because he's not immortal. Eventually, he's going to fall off a cliff, but I think he's still going to be really good next year. Jimmy Butler, I think, is also a totally fine inclusion here. He was not good against the Celtics for most of those games. Not really great in that Denver series, but I think a lot of that is attributable to that ankle injury he suffered against the Knicks mid-series. That clearly affected the way he played, especially on offense. Just affected how aggressive he was attacking. But what he did against Milwaukee in round 1 last year, that is the stuff that puts you into superstar status. So there's no way I can leave Jimmy Butler out of the top 15. And then the last two spots are hard for me to figure out. So Donovan Mitchell, I think, is a fine inclusion here as well. He was, what was he, like third or fourth in MVP voting last year? The fact that he's still going to be in his prime and that I think he is close to being a number 1 option on a championship team, definitely a very good number 2 option. I think Mitchell here is reasonable. And then the surprise of this, again, this is me being bullish on the young stars that I really like, Anthony Edwards. He's been in the playoffs for 2 years now, and both years he's looked pretty good. I mean, especially for a young player. Again, the raw potential is just tremendous. There are so many things he can add to his game. He's clearly driven. He's clearly motivated. He's gotten better every year. I don't see why he can't take yet another leap. So I have Anthony Edwards rounding out my top 15. Moving on to level 6. This is 16 through 21. Paul George, John Morant, Damian Lillard, De'Aaron Fox, Jaylen Brown, Zion Williamson. So let's get Zion first out of the way. Again, like with Kawhi, if we take injuries into concern, he is unrankable. But when he was healthy at the beginning of the season last year, he was putting up historic numbers. And by historic numbers, I mean there was nobody in NBA history with his kind of scoring production and his efficiency other than him and Shaq. It was him and Shaq. And then the rest of the players I think are pretty self-evident. I don't think people have too much of a problem with this. You can definitely put a few of them in the top 15 over, I think, Anthony Edwards, if you want to make the case that Edwards is not going to take as big of a leap, but I'm just betting that Edwards will. So I have these 5 guys rounding out my top 20. And then let's move on to level 7. This is 22 through 28. So there are 2 young players here, Tyrese Halliburton and Mikal Bridges. If you were to rank them based on how they were last season, they might not make this level, but again, they're really young. I'm expecting another leap this following year, so I'm okay having them in this top 30. Trae Young, Jamal Murray, Kyrie Irving, in my mind, they're in the same echelon of guards in the NBA in terms of their production and how valuable they are for this upcoming season. Pascal Siakam was really good last year, still in his prime, should still be very good next year. And then Brandon Ingram, he got injured, so he only played like half of last season, but when he was healthy, he looks really, really good. Moving on to level 8. So this level is actually really interesting because there are a lot of players here that are not very popular, right? I have not met many NBA fans outside of Minnesota that actually like Karl-Anthony Towns as a player or as a person, but let's be real. It'd be ridiculous to rank him any lower than this. Like, duh. Same thing with James Harden. I think you could arguably rank James Harden a little bit lower if you think the age is really going to start to catch up with him. Because it already has. Like, he's lost so much of his explosiveness that he had during his Houston days. And then Jaren Jackson Jr. and Rudy Gobert, I think, are comparable enough. Jaren Jackson Jr. coming off Defensive Player of the Year. Rudy Gobert, multiple-time DPOY winner. CJ McCollum, Bradley Beal, I think also relatively comparable. Jalen Brunson, also in this tier. The only reason I don't have Jalen Brunson higher, honestly, is because I do think he's mostly reached his ceiling as a player. And he's really, really good. I mean, especially in the playoffs last year against Miami. He was single-handedly carrying the Knicks through most of those games. And then Bam Adebayo averaged 20 points per game in the regular season. Just a phenomenal two-way center. It's hard to say he is noticeably better than Jaren Jackson Jr. or Rudy Gobert or Karl-Anthony Towns even, but I think he does belong in the same tier as those other centers. Okay, now moving on to level 9. This is 37 through 45. So here we have DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. Again, I think roughly the same echelon of players. And even though I'm not a huge fan of their individual games, the production is still there. they're both still young enough to the point where they should not decline this following year. And then you have a bunch of young guards here that I think have potential and should continue to take steps forward. We have Tyrese Maxey, Darius Garland, and Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane just signed a max extension with the Grizzlies. I think it's a little bit too much money, but it's also not the worst thing in the world. Oh, and LaMelo Ball too, of course, belongs in that conversation as well. And then we have three big men here, Lauri Markkanen, DeAndre Ayton, Domantas Sabonis. So if there's one big man out of these three that I think could move up, it's probably Sabonis, just based on his production last season. But the way he disappointed and disappeared in the playoffs really concerns me. DeAndre Ayton, like with Karl-Anthony Towns, not the most popular player amongst NBA fans, but let's be honest, like, you cannot rank him lower than this. And then Lauri Markkanen, hard to judge. He had definitely a breakout year last year in Utah. I'm personally a little more skeptical of Markkanen than I am of some other young players. Okay, moving on to level 10. This is 46 through 55. Julius Randle, Klay Thompson, Franz Wagner, Kristaps Porzingis, Drew Holiday, Fred VanVleet, DeJounte Murray, Evan Mobley, Jeremy Grant, Kyle Kuzma. Julius Randle and Kristaps Porzingis. So if we're just looking at regular season production, Julius Randle should be a little bit higher. But yet again, he proved in the playoffs his game does not translate very well. His shooting efficiency, which is already not great in the regular season, just falls off a cliff in the playoffs. A lot of the stuff, his bully ball, his iso ball, mid-range stuff, just is not very good when he's actually playing good teams. So I have him a little bit lower. Some people might have Klay Thompson a little bit lower, but I'm trying not to be too much of a prisoner of the end of that Lakers series where he was really bad for a few games. I'm trying to look at his body of work during the regular season last year, as well as, of course, for the entirety of his career. And there's no reason for me to think that he's going to get worse. DeJounte Murray is a little bit hard to rank. I could see him being a little bit higher here in that same tier with guys like Darius Garland if you think he's going to get better. Kristaps is going to have a very interesting year. In Boston, he's just not going to put up the same numbers that other guys will, but I think in a vacuum, if you were to like build a team around him or like actually just draft him without knowing the other players on your team, I think the value he provides is still of this quality. And then moving on to the tier below, 56 through 66, Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Draymond Green, Victor Wembanyama, OG Anunoby, Tyler Hero, Jordan Clarkson, Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, Jordan Poole, Austin Reeves. So we have a lot of guards on this tier, a lot of young players. Draymond Green, very hard player to judge in a vacuum, but I don't really feel comfortable leaving him any lower than this. I think he still brings a lot to winning playoff games. OG Anunoby, I'm expecting to take a step forward. Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson obviously have tremendous potential, but they are rookies. I don't expect them this following year to be that good. Wemby in particular, I think, will struggle a lot offensively, but he's going to come in the league and immediately be a great defensive player, and that's going to count for something. Some people might be surprised by Jordan Clarkson here, but Jordan Clarkson put up 20 points per game for a Utah team last year that was really competitive. I don't see a reason why he should be worse this following year. So if I'm going to have guys like Tyler Hero, then I think Clarkson belongs in this tier as well. And then Jordan Poole, everybody's making fun of him going to Washington, should have gone to China, yada, yada. I think he's going to have a bounce back year in Washington. And again, if I'm going to have guys like Tyler Hero and Jordan Clarkson in here, I don't see why Poole is going to be worse than them necessarily. And then moving on to the tier below that, we have, again, a bunch of young players. Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams, Jared Allen, Paolo Banchero, Cade Cunningham, Spencer Dinwiddie, Aaron Gordon, Jaden Ivey, Jalen McDaniels, Buddy Hield, Miles Turner, Michael Porter Jr. I think Chet Holmgren, much like Victor Wembanyama, is going to struggle a little bit offensively in his rookie year, in his debut year. But he's going to come in the league and he should already be very good defensively. So that should count for something. Paolo Banchero and Cade Cunningham are pretty comparable players as well. They're going to put up a lot of points because they're playing for bad teams, but on very inefficient shooting. Of course, they still have potential. They're very young. But this following year, I don't think I can rank them higher than this. And Aaron Gordon here is kind of like in that tier of being an overqualified role player. Jaden Ivey, I think, is going to take a step forward, so I have him ranked pretty high here. And then lastly, the final row. This is the last row where like it doesn't really matter. I mean, you can look through some of the names. I have also a lot of honorable mentions as well. There's like Derek White, I thought about ranking here. But yeah, that's pretty much my list of the top 91 players heading into the NBA next season. I'm sure the comments section will be very nice and respectful and peaceful to other people's opinions because certainly there is nothing controversial about ranking NBA players in the vacuum. Am I right? Am I right? Okay. Well, I hope I did reasonably well in this ranking, in your opinion. But that's it for this video. I'll see you next time.